Listen. This is St James's Park, home of English Premier League football club Newcastle United, a club that until recently had suffered decades of disappointment.
Picking your men up, doing your jobs, all the things that Newcastle don't do.
Now, for the first time in 20 years, Newcastle fans will be watching their team in the Champions League, Europe's top-tier competition.
Breathtaking. I can't tell, no words.
This is what we've been waiting for, man. It's an absolute dream. I think it's fantastic.
Newcastle's recent success has less to do with the northeast of England and more to do with their new owners, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, and their deep pockets.
And football is not the only professional sport that Saudi Arabia is investing in.
Saudi Arabia is the world's top oil exporter and second largest producer behind the United States. Its vast oil and gas resources have made it the world's 17th largest economy. So why does it need this massive investment in sport? Saudi Arabia is heavily reliant on oil revenues, which, despite efforts to diversify the economy, still account for a sizable portion of its GDP. This is significantly affected by fluctuations in oil prices. According to the IMF, oil revenues averaged 75% of total Saudi budget revenues between 2010 and 2021, but varied from a 93% peak in 2011 to just 53% in 2020 as the COVID-19 pandemic depressed global oil demand. With the world transitioning away from its reliance on fossil fuels and towards more sustainable energy sources, Saudi Arabia needs to find other long-term sources of revenue, and Vision 2030 hopes to lay the groundwork for leisure, tourism and entertainment to shoulder much of the burden.
I think the investment in sport and how that serves the London image is an inextricable part of Saudi Arabia's foreign policy, its commercial policy and its economic policy.
But will the kingdom get a return on its investment?
England's Premier League is the most watched football league in the world, boasting some of the sport's biggest clubs and best-known stars, and racking up billions of global viewers every year. I was brought up a Manchester City fan. We were dismal. Then in 2008, the club was bought by the Abu Dhabi United Group, an investment vehicle for the Abu Dhabi royal family. Over the next 15 years, City went from this to this.
Treble winners, Manchester City!
In 2008, Manchester City became the first major club to be purchased by owners with ties to a Gulf state. Today, Abu Dhabi's City Football Group owns more than 10 clubs across 4 continents. Abu Dhabi's venture paved the way for other Gulf states looking to expand their global influence, as demonstrated by the 2 teams playing in the Champions League. Saudi-owned Newcastle United and Paris Saint-Germain, owned by Qatar Sports Investments.
Let's be honest, the 2 countries are not on the best of terms than anything else, and we often say that sport is war without guns, and that was one way of making a declaration in favour of Saudi Arabia.
According to an EY study, football contributed around $9 billion to the UK economy over the course of the 2019-2020 season. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, in a media interview, suggested that he had already secured 1% growth in GDP from sports and was aiming for another 1.5%. If sportswashing was going to increase economic growth, he said, then Saudi Arabia would continue to do sportswashing. In 2022, Saudi GDP was $1.1 trillion. So in order for sports to increase its GDP by 1%, it would already need to be pouring around $11 billion into Riyadh's coffers.
I think the GDP claims were optimistic. You've only got to look at what's happening in the Saudi Pro League in terms of the average attendances, with matches in the last weekend as low as 200 people going to the match. So I don't see the GDP claim as being one which really proves itself once you start to do any form of forensic analysis.
Even though the Saudi economy grew 8.7% in 2022, things are not looking so rosy in 2023. The IMF expects growth to decelerate to 1.9%, while many economists see it slipping into contraction. The government's own forecasts suggest a return to a budget deficit. Unemployment was 8.3% in the second quarter of 2023, though economists believe the true figure could be much higher. In recent years, the government has given handouts to its population in the absence of the commercial infrastructure that would yield sufficient jobs. While the majority of foreigners hold private sector jobs, economists estimate that around 2/3 of employed Saudis work for the state. Ideally, the government would like to transition to a more self-sustaining economy.
It's far more to do with domestic acceptance, proving to his citizens that he can deliver Neymar, Ronaldo, Benzema, and other global names. And if you can do that across a variety of sports, then any fears of the equivalent of an Arab Spring rising that we saw in the likes of Libya and Egypt a few years ago, they're likely to be dissipated, because what have people got to protest about if they are seeing the entertainment that they crave?
Reforms and state-led investment have seen the non-oil sector's contribution to Saudi GDP rise to 44% in 2022, just 0.7 percentage points higher than it was in 2016. So while not impossible, it may take much longer than MBS suggests for the deluge of sporting investment to come to fruition. Stephen Coburn is the head of Economic and Social Justice at Amnesty International. He's also a lifelong supporter of Newcastle United.
I think it's likely that there is a cultural and a sort of PR return on investment. I think it's such a sport, and especially football, such a huge cultural asset with reach all over the world, then it is a canny investment for states that would like to show itself in a different light and appeal to different audiences around the world.
It will never receive a financial return on investment. I cannot see a position in which fans of football around the world, their first choice will be the Saudi Pro League as opposed to La Liga, Bundesliga, Premier League and so on. And that's partly due to the fact that historically football fans have been very intransigent with regards to their loyalties.
But the Middle Eastern investment in football hasn't stopped with buying clubs. Qatar hosted the World Cup in 2022, while the Saudi Pro League spent around $1 billion in the summer of 2023, luring some of the world's best-known players to its domestic clubs. In June, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia took control of 4 of the country's leading clubs, Al Ittihad, Al Hilal, Al Ahly and Al Nasser, as part of the government's Vision 2030 project to attract investment in its domestic sports sector. And then there's golf, Formula One, boxing, tennis, wrestling. The list goes on. The speed and scale of the investment has garnered global attention, but the debate extends far beyond the money or the upheaval of the traditional sporting power structures.
So, why is Saudi Arabia's investment in sport so controversial?
Saudi Arabia has a well-documented history of human rights abuses, which has prompted critics to chalk its bankrolling of big-name sporting events and teams up to sportswashing, an effort to launder its global reputation and divert attention away from a dire record on human rights.
For the last few years, we've had record executions, minors on death row, we've had record sentences, prison sentences for human rights activists. A woman, a Leeds University student, sentenced to 34 years in prison for sending a tweet. We've got exploitation of migrant workers, and we've got really serious repression. So there's many Newcastle fans who, of course, support the club, but are really concerned about the actions of the ownership. It needs investment, it needs tourism to diversify from oil. What we've seen over the last few years is an enormous investment in sport, and that is all part of a strategy to rehabilitate the kingdom's image.
Danny Spraggan held a season ticket at St James's Park for 30 years. He's recently handed it back and become a vocal member of the protest group NUFC Fans Against Sportswashing.
I think, like many fans, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't part of me wasn't very excited to suddenly become the richest club in world club football. I don't think anyone wouldn't be. But I quickly decided going to the match that I couldn't take part in all the excitement.
Do you feel like that voice is being heard? And what's the ultimate sort of aim for the group as far as sort of taking it beyond protest?
So I think what we're trying to do is speak to people in Saudi Arabia whose lives are impacted by the oppressive regime and trying to raise these questions at the club level because nobody else is.
And you talked about the antagonistic reaction in some cases. What sort of objections do you mostly face?
I think there are probably lots of contradictions in what we're doing, but that doesn't take away your right to protest about the club that you identify as a fan with and that you feel part of. I feel this is my football club more than it is the Saudi PIFs.
Yet defenders of Saudi Arabia may contend that there is an element of hypocrisy here. A lot of the criticism has come from individuals and organisations based in countries that are happy to maintain close economic ties with Riyadh, to buy its oil and to sell it their arms. The UK, for example, sold more than $1 billion worth of arms to Saudi Arabia in 2022.
The Premier League has always welcomed investment from anybody that has a large bank account, and it has not tended to worry too much. And I think you've also got to be a little bit careful that we don't move into a slightly xenophobic regime, in the sense that there are many things about the United States with regards to its domestic policies across a variety of social issues, which would appear to be at odds with even what we consider to be appropriate here in the UK. And yet nobody's saying that an American owner should not come into the game.
While the global sports industry has been transformed by Riyadh's investments, could the need for international appeal become a catalyst for change in the conservative country?
Does that happen? Does that ever happen? I mean, you look at China had the Beijing Olympics, and has their record improved? Same with Russia in the Winter Olympics.
We always say that sports washing only really works if we stop talking about it. It does mean that sports bodies, whether that's the Premier League, whether that's FIFA, need to get serious about the role of states in our game to protect the integrity of the game in terms of competitive balance and fairness, but also to make sure it can't be associated with or can't assist human rights abuses.